Today I'm going to show you how to create this procedural crumpled paper texture. We're going to do some displacement, then make a woven paper texture as well for the bump, and then I'll show you how to turn it into a group node for easy customization, including color, crumple influence, and even a seed value. If you like what I do, by the way, and want to support me, you can do so on my Gumroad or Patreon page, and the links will be in the description. To set up our scene, let's get rid of this cube and bring in a plane. I'm also going to get rid of this light. We don't really need it. I'm going to change to the Cycles render engine and change to experimental. And if you have access to a GPU, select that. It'll be a little faster. And then I'm going to select my plane again and go down to the modifiers tab. Just select a subdivision surface modifier and click adapt to subdivision and just leave all the settings as is except change it to simple, I guess. Then go down to the material properties here and let's put that same material that was on our cube onto our plane just by selecting it here. I'm going to scroll down to where it says settings and where it says displacement. I'm going to change it from bump only to displacement only. Actually, displacement and bump. Either of these settings will work, but if you have it on bump only, your displacement won't work. Since we took out our light, our scene is kind of dark if we go into rendered mode, so I'm going to click on world properties and click on color there, and then environment texture. Then click open and navigate to where you got some HDRIs. I've got some free ones I downloaded from hdrihaven.com, and I'm going to use Autumn Park 1K. Now we can see this picture in the background. That's lighting our scene. I'm going to turn that off by clicking ray visibility and just unchecking where it says camera. It's still going to continue to light my plane, but I just can't see it in the background now. I'm going to change my whole middle area here to my shader editor, so we've got that a lot bigger on our screen. Then I'm going to change the top right to the 3D viewport. So, we can still see our object, but most of our focus is on the shading tab here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and if you hold down Z and move your mouse up, you'll go into rendered mode. I'm going to be using mostly some Voronoi textures just mixed together to create kind of a crumpled paper texture there. So I'm going to hit Shift A, click on search, and start typing Voronoi and hit enter, and that'll bring in a Voronoi texture. If you hold down Control Shift and left click on your node, that'll bring up a preview of what this node looks like. And that's a node wrangler shortcut. So if that's not working, just go to preferences, go to add-ons, and then start typing node. And just make sure that this box is checkmarked next to node wrangler. It's built into Blender, so you don't have to download anything extra. And another node wrangler shortcut, by the way, is while this Voronoi texture is highlighted, hit Control T. That'll bring up a texture coordinate and mapping node. And I'm just going to plug from object into vector instead of from generated there. I'm going to grab this Voronoi and just move it up a little bit and hit Control Shift D so that it remains attached and duplicates it. Otherwise, it just duplicates it if you hit Shift D. You can do that one more time as well. Bring in another Voronoi. I'm going to create a reroute here by holding down Shift and right-clicking and dragging through. Just creates a point there. So you can create as many of those as you want just to organize your nodes. And I'm going to Shift D this Voronoi and just attach another one down here and then Control Shift D that one as well. And why don't we just make a reroute right here? A little easier to look at. I'm going to grab this bottom Voronoi and Control Shift D that one more time. Let's move it over there and Shift and right click and drag through there. And I'm going to bring in two nodes just before this one here. I'm going to bring in a mapping node, place it right there, and then a vector rotate. And I'll just place it right there. And now we got the bulk of our texture setup done already. We're just going to go through and set up all the settings and just mix them together. Let's start with this top Voronoi texture. I'm just going to change the scale to 1 so the pattern is larger there. Let's check out this second Voronoi texture. I'm going to set this to 1 as well. It's going to be exactly the same, except I'm going to change F1 to F2. And this third one, let's check this out. I'm going to change it to F2, change the scale to 10, so it's actually a smaller pattern this time. And I'm just going to decrease the randomness by a very small amount, just to 0.9. For this fourth Voronoi texture, I'm going to leave the scale at 5 and the randomness at 1, and I'm just going to change it to F2. Then this fifth one, I'm going to change it to Manhattan instead of Euclidean, and then I'm just going to change the scale to 1. So we can see what that looks like. The Manhattan is these stars, and it's just a bigger pattern now. Then this last Voronoi pattern here, I'm going to change this to Smooth F1, change the scale to 1, and change the smoothness to 0.6, and I'll leave the randomness at 1. I'm going to come back to the first Voronoi texture, and let's look at that again. I'm going to move this principled BSDF just out of the way for now, and bring in a displacement node. So if I put this here, and I run displacement into the height, and then run this into the displacement right here, we can see what this node is doing to our plane there. I'm going to hit Shift A and bring in a map range node and just place it right here. This is kind of like a color ramp. You know, this bottom one is, or this top one here is where the bottom flag is. So, you know, just at 0. This is where the top flag is at 1. And this is the bottom value. And so this is like black because it's 0. And this is white because it's 1. So what I'm going to do here is essentially like flipping the two flags. I'm going to set the black to 1. And I'm going to set the white to 0. We can see it's just kind of the opposite shape now. You know, this is that pattern that we saw on the top before. It's now, you know, on the bottom. If we click on this map range node and get a preview of that, we can see the cell boundaries even better there. So I'm just going to bring in a math node and place it right after that map range, and just open this up and hit M, and we'll change it to multiply. And this is going to be able to control our strength of this individual branch of, you know, the displacement here. So if we set this to lower, you know, it's more flat. I'm going to leave it at 0.6. You know, we'll probably want to turn down this scale of everything at the end, but for now, I'll just leave this at 0.6 here. Let's take a look at this second Voronoi texture now. You know, it's kind of similar to this first one. The only difference is I changed it from F1 to F2. And I'm going to bring in, well, actually, let's just run this right into the height here. We'll just kind of see what the displacement looks like. You know, it's a little more erratic, but it does kind of look like this F1 here. So this is going to be some folds going in the other direction. And we're actually going to use this Voronoi down here to kind of control where it shows up. So I'm going to bring in a mix RGB and just place it right here. And then this distance is going to run into this factor here. So it's kind of difficult to see what's going on. It's actually a little easier to see if we look at the preview of this displacement here. You know, it's a little bit strong for now. Why don't we pop another multiply on right here, and we'll just change this to 0.2 for now, so it's a little more subtle. We can look at the principled BSDF as well. That'll give us an idea of what it looks like. Come into this mix RGB onto color 2, and if you scroll up and down with your mouse wheel, you can see it changes the value of this color in color 2 there. It's just a gray value, and so you can see how it changes the image on the right as well. You know, right around this level here, there's a lot less detail. If you go further from that level, there's more detail in either direction. So something to keep in mind. It's a good controller to have there. I had this set at just BF, 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 but you can set it however you like. I'm going to do something similar with this next Voronoi here. Let's take a look at this one, and I'm going to plug this into height now so we can see what's going on there. You know, again, it's a little strong. So let's take this multiply here and bring it down here, and you can see there's just a lot of, you know, same kind of detail that was in here, but it's just a lot smaller because the frequency is higher. We're going to do something similar with this Voronoi texture that we did up here, where I'm going to pop a mix RGB there, and then run the distance into the factor. And now we can see there's some dark spots there. We can control this one here as well with this mix RGB color 2. You know, scroll this up or down, and it'll change the result on the right. Another thing we can do is bring in a map range node and place it right before that mix RGB there. And I'm going to do the equivalent of basically bringing the black up to 0.5 on a color ramp by just adjusting this from min to 0.5. Because this is set to 0, I'm controlling like a black color, a black shade, and I'm just bringing it up to the halfway point there. Let's check out the last Voronoi texture I set up here, and just move the displacement down, and I'm going to run distance into height here. So you can see, because it's set to smooth F1 there, the smoothness here, if we set it higher, it's even smoother, and if we set it low, it's the same as if smoothness isn't even on there. So at 0.6, it's kind of close to the middle, but it creates these smooth edges here, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to do something similar. I'm just going to bring in a map range, place it here so I could crush the black or the white if I wanted, but it's pretty sensitive, so you might want to hold down Shift while you're adjusting this stuff here. And then I'm just going to bring in a math node set to multiply to place right here. so we can control the strength of this bottom effect. So hopefully you were able to pick up on what I was doing with these Voronoi here. Just creating different patterns that I'm now going to mix together. So I'm going to duplicate this multiply, just open it up and hit A, and it'll switch to add. And then I'm going to hold down Alt and right click and drag from one node to the other. Just hooks them up really fast. So Shift D to duplicate that guy, add these two together. I'll do it one more time, and we'll just add this bottom one together up here. And now we're just going to run all of this into the height at the end. So now if we look at our, principled BSDF, we can see the entire pattern there. It's a little strong, and this is where this comes in at the end here. We can adjust this displacement value. Why don't we change this to something like 0.1? Looks a little bit more subtle. Let's look at it from the top. I'm going to hit Control Alt and 0 on the number pad. Actually, let's do that one more time, but center it. And now I just got the camera from the top there. I can hit G and ZZ to zoom in and out, which is kind of handy. Doesn't matter what your axes are. If you hit it twice, it just goes to the local transformation. This is what our render looks like so far. It's not bad, but everything's much too straight. So I'm going to want to distort this a little bit. To do that, I'm just going to bring in a noise texture and place it, not a white noise texture, a regular noise texture, and just place it right after this texture coordinate. And I'm going to bring in a mixer. Oh, MISR works for that as well, apparently. And I'm going to run object into color 2 there, so we have kind of a controller for how much we're mixing this together. I'm going to change the scale to 10 and the detail to 4 on the mixer there, or pardon me, the noise texture. And on the mixer, I'm just going to change this to 0.92 so the effect is a bit more subtle. Let's render that out again. It's looking better. The effect might be a little strong here, so you could always turn it down by turning down each of the individual parts that kind of add together, or the overall displacement as well, just at the end. We could also try flipping this around as well. Maybe if we set it back to the regular settings, that might look better. It does look fairly similar. It's just the creases are going the other way, so I kind of liked it with 1 and 0 like this here, but feel free to play around. Let's try turning this down a little bit to 0.05 instead and rendering that out. Yeah, I like the look of this. Looks a little bit more subtle, but again, it's totally up to you how you want to arrange this. So now I'm going to spend some time setting up the actual texture. Since I'm done the displacement here, I'm just going to come out of object again and just make a reroute by holding down shift and right clicking and dragging through there. And I'm just going to bring in a mapping node, place it right here, then just control shift D it so it remains attached to that reroute point and duplicates a new one. Then on this top one, I'm just going to change this X scale to 4, and this bottom one, I'm going to change the Y scale to 4. I'm going to bring in a noise texture and just place it right after this mapping node. Change the scale to 25, the detail to 6, and the roughness is going to be at 1. I'm going to duplicate this and bring it down for this bottom one. So we can see this top one is just a vertical texture, and this bottom one is just a horizontal texture. And I'm just going to mix those together with a math node set to multiply. So we'll just drag this in there, and we can see kind of creates a grainy texture there with some horizontal and some vertical elements. I'm going to bring in a color ramp, place it right here, and then Control Shift D it so it's duplicated. And we're going to plug this top one into the roughness, and this bottom one is going to go into a bump node and then into that normal socket. It's going to go into that height of the bump node and then into the normal there. And this strength, we'll turn this down to 0.1 or 0.2. Maybe we'll leave that at 0.2 for now. In this color ramp up here, let's change this bottom slider. The hex code is going to be 7F, 7F, 7F. So it's kind of a middle gray color. And that's just going into the roughness. So let's see what that looks like after all that's done. We'll render it out. This looks good, but I just realized I forgot to do something with that bottom Voronoi. We set up that vector rotate in that mapping node, and then we didn't do anything to those. So I'm going to quickly go back and fix that. I'm going to come down to this bottom vector rotate and mapping node. And first of all, I'll just adjust this Y scale. I'm going to set it to 4. And so let's look at that Voronoi. We can see it's just kind of squashed vertically. And then with this angle here, I can orient it slightly differently. So I'm going to set this at 35 degrees. Then we have it a bit more angled, a bit more interesting. And if we look at our overall displacement, we can see that there's that same angled shape coming through there. So I'm just going to render it out again, just looking at this printable BSDF. I like the look of this, so I'm just going to keep it like this. And I'm just going to set up a group node so I can control this a little bit easier. I'm going to grab everything except for the texture coordinate and the material output there, and then hit Control G. And now we've got a group node. I'm just going to tab out of it, and we'll just, you know what, I'm just going to do that again because I don't want 3 inputs for the same thing. So we'll just make a reroute point there, grab everything again, including that reroute, and hit Control G. Now if we tab out, we only have 1 input for the object there. We can see that these are crossed over as well. So I'm just going to tab back in, hit N, go up to this group here, and just swap these with this arrow. And if we hit N, tab out, we can see that they're not crossed over. I'm going to tab back into this node group here, and why don't we move this over, make a reroute right here, and I'm just going to bring in a vector math node, place it right here, and we'll just change this to, not to subtract, but to scale. And I'm just going to plug this into the scale. So this isn't going to affect the size of this, visual texture we've got here, just the displacement texture. You can move that up and down. We could try it out, just tab it out and move this up. You don't want to move it too high because it'll start to look a little weird, but you can control the size of your textures that way. Let's tab back out and let's grab this color here as well. I'd like to be able to control the color of the paper. And now if we tab back out, we can change this to whatever color we want, and that'll be our paper there as well. Let's tab back in and try setting up some influence like this multiply here. So I'm just going to plug that in, plug this multiply in here, plug this multiply in here, and then this one down here, we'll get that one as well. I'm just going to rename some of these. So this is the large folds influence. Let's just call it that. And this is the large crease influence, maybe. And then this is the small crease influence. And this is the angled crease influence. Okay. I'm just going to hit N to get rid of that shelf and tab back out. We can just kind of try playing around with these a little bit, see how they work. So there's the large fold influence, the large crease influence, the small crease influence, and the small angled influence. So I'm just going to reset those all back to these numbers. Probably best to keep these in between 0 and 1. And you could even go in and set a min and max for each. So if you go like 0 and 1 for that one there, 0 and 1, 0 and 1, and finally 0 and 1. Then let's go back out. You can now see that these won't go past 0 and 1. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe that's not what you want. It might be better to set them at a max of 2, just so you have a bit more control. That's what I'm going to do. Then we're not so limited, but it is an option for you. Why don't we set up a value for kind of a seed value there as well. It'll involve just changing some or all of these Voronoi to 4D. So why don't we do that? I'll just change them all to 4D just to demonstrate this. And 4D. And I'm going to plug this into the W slot on all of these here. We could split this up into a couple different value nodes, but I'm going to put everything into one, just so we have one seed value that we can just kind of cycle between if we want there. I'm going to create a reroute there, and then I'm going to plug this into that reroute point there. Get rid of that value node. We don't really need it anymore. And let's go ahead and rename this to seed. Let's try that seed value out. I'm going to tab out here and just get a zoomed in portion here. Let's try going through the seed value. Yeah, so each one gives us, a different seed there. There's one more thing I'm going to do too, and that's kind of creating an influence for these large creases and small creases. Because we had those masks set up, we can do that fairly easily. And it's just going to be involving this map range node here. And I'm going to duplicate it actually, place it here, and just put that to 0. So I'm going to move this group node over a little bit. And I'm going to plug this one into the from min there. and this is going to go into the from min on that other map range node there. So the idea here, actually, let's put that seed at the bottom, just so it's kind of its own separate thing there. So the idea here is I turned up these values here, by the way. I just, where is it? Yeah, I turned these up to 1 and 1, whereas before those are at 0.2 and 0.2, just to demonstrate this a bit better, so I could see what was going on. So this from min here, this is going to be the large crease influence. So if I turn this up, you can see there's a lot more large creases. I'm just going to put it down to 0. Nope, this one, put that down to 0. And this is the same thing with those small creases. If we turn this up, we get a lot more small creases. We don't want to go over 0.99, so let's set that up. I'm going to put it back to 0.5, and we'll tab in. And so this guy here is going to be a minimum of 0, and let's just go max at 0.99. And same thing with this one here. Minimum of 0, max at 0.999. So it can't quite get to 1, but it can get really close. Then this is going to be the large crease mask. And this one's going to be the small crease mask. By the way, if you're renaming a whole bunch of these, you F2 in there, or let's say you're renaming this, you can tab between them. But if you get to the bottom one and you tab again, it'll go here. Even if you have more things that you want to do, like let's say you're at the top here and you tab through these, instead of going to the next one, it's just going to go to base color. To fix that, you can drag this down, then you can get them all at once. It's kind of handy when working with a lot of inputs there. I'm going to tab back out. Let's just try a few things here. Let's try this large crease. Yeah, can't quite go to 1, but it can go pretty close. And when you're at 0.99, it might not look great as well. So if you wanted to change that max, you could, but I'm not going to really bother. The seed is nice here. These large crease, small crease influences are good. I'm going to decrease those to 0.2 and 0.2 again, but we can turn those up if we want. One last thing, let's get the overall displacement. That should be important. Let's move that over here and just plug this into the scale. So we can see it's set at 0.05 as a default. Just leave it as is. But let's change that from scale, tab back in, and we'll just call this displacement. But I want to spell it right. Oh my god, there we go. So these are all the inputs I'm going to add, but you could keep going if you want. Maybe put like a bump strength for that paper texture, or maybe something to do with this noise texture or the mix amount. Anything that you don't want to go into the node group to adjust, just make sure you put on the outside and then just enlarge it a little bit if you can't read your titles there. It doesn't really matter what you call these, as long as you remember what they do. So, don't make them too general, but, try not to use too many words as well. Just find your balance. All right, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you can see what I was doing. If you didn't understand something, just let me know in the comments. I'll see what I can do to clear up that confusion. Thanks so much for everybody who's been supporting me on Gumroad and Patreon. It means a lot to me and encourages me to keep going. So thanks again.